Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Cooper, and I will be presenting on the artist Georgia O'Keeffe. I titled my presentation, Speaking Through Art, a look at American artist Georgia O'Keeffe. One of Georgia O'Keeffe's quotes is, "I found I could say things with color and shapes that I couldn't say any other way, things I had no words for." This quote is what inspired the title of my presentation, and here is just a quick and dirty timeline about her life, just to introduce a bit about her overall life before we go into a few details. So she was born in Wisconsin on November 15th, 1887, in Sun Prairie. She died in Santa Fe, New Mexico, at the age of 98 on March 6th, 1986. She studied at both the Art Institute of Chicago and the Art Students League in New York. She taught art briefly in South Carolina and Texas for a few years during 1912 to 1918. She moved back to New York in 1918 to work as an artist under the encouragement of Alfred Stieglitz, who was a famous gallery owner and ends up becoming her future husband. In 1929, on her first trip to New Mexico with a friend, she became enamored with the landscape and continued to visit every year after. Once her husband died in 1946, she permanently moved to New Mexico. During the 1950s, she traveled extensively internationally, and she eventually became known as the mother of American modernism. So we're going to start talking about Georgia and her life around the time of when she was teaching in Texas, so about 1912 to 1918. During this time, abstract art was starting to emerge as a new way of expression in Europe, and it was slowly starting to be seen in America around 1914, just before World War I. Georgia became heavily influenced by the artist Arthur Wensley Dow, and he was an American abstract artist at this time. This new way of expression was inspiring to Georgia, and her friend in New York ended up showing a prestigious gallery owner, which was Alfred Stieglitz, a few of Georgia's abstract charcoal drawings that she had sent her in 1916, and this was the beginning of her journey towards becoming known as the mother of American modernism. The gallery owner, Alfred Stieglitz, like I said, who became or ended up marrying Georgia later, was so impressed by these charcoals that he hung them in his gallery without even asking for permission from Georgia. Here are a few examples of those charcoals. So what was happening during this time? So it was the middle of World War I at the time that she began experimenting in abstraction. This form of expression was born out of the times, possibly because of the trauma that many were facing from the war. And people were trying to come to terms with the consequences of war, such as all the death and destruction, and as well as challenging their current social views. Her brother Alexis was in the military during World War I and was actually stationed at a military camp nearby where she was in Texas. So in the fall in 1917, he was actually going to be deployed to fight in Europe for World War I. Her brother ended up dying fighting in France. Another thing that was happening during this time was in 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic caused a ton of problems throughout the world, and it ended up killing 2 million people worldwide. This is a picture that Georgia painted. Now, Georgia was able to visit her brother Alexis in the fall of 1917 while he was at the military base near her before he was sent to Europe. Georgia painted this abstract watercolor titled The Flag in 1918 while she was on leave of absence recovering from the Spanish flu pandemic. I imagine that her brother's death had an influence on this painting, which actually was never displayed until 1968. This is a watercolor called The Flag by Georgia O'Keeffe. During the 1920s, Georgia focused painting on depictions of magnified flowers, which she intended to convey that nature and all its beauty was as powerful as the widespread industrialization that was happening during this time. So, what else was happening in 1920s? During this time, Austrian psychologist Sigmund Freud views on the relationship between an individual's psyche and their sexuality was becoming popular in America. He had many ideas about sexuality and actually suggested that one way of looking at art, besides its aesthetic value, was an expression of the artist's unconscious thoughts or desires. Many social changes were beginning, such as women gaining the right to vote in 1920. Widespread industrialization was happening, and also there was a push of consumer-oriented economy. And although there were many progressive things happening in America at this time, in the art world, women were still being challenged and unable to be taken seriously as professional artists. Women were still considered crafters rather than fine artists. So to emphasize this mentality of the time in the art world, I had to include this quote by Hans Hofmann, who is one of the most important figures of post-war American art. It says, "This is so good, you wouldn't know it was done by a woman." So he was saying this to Lee Krasner, who was an early 20th century female abstract expressionist painter, and he intended it as a compliment. You can take it as a compliment if you want, but I don't think I would. And anyway, it goes to show that it was especially difficult for women to be taken seriously as artists during this time. Now, George's husband, Alfred Stieglitz, who was also a famous photographer as well as the prestigious gallery owner in New York, he began to promote her flower depictions as erotically charged. He controversially displayed them in his gallery alongside his work of nude photographs he had taken of Georgia. And he did this in order to insinuate the sexual link between the two separate works of art. Unfortunately, this produced a sexualized public image of Georgia and her work, and she ended up spending the rest of her career fighting this stigmatization of her. For Georgia, this was not what she wished to portray in her magnified florals. She very much wished to be portrayed as a serious artist, and Georgia's floral paintings were in fact her way of exploring the world of abstraction through her use of perspective and scale on the flowers that she painted. She forced people to take notice of something that could easily be overlooked. Her response to people who thought her art to be sexual was this quote here: "They were talking about themselves, not me." Because of these incorrect interpretations, Georgia decided to move forward and produce more recognizable forms in her paintings. She starts now to focus more on what she sees around her home in New York City. So now what's happening in the 1930s? So we have the Great Depression, and it caused economic insecurity and was affecting Americans from all walks of life. Also during this time, there was severe drought that was plaguing the Southern Plains regions of America, and the area became known as the Dust Bowl. Crops failed, livestock perished, leaving scattered bones across the bare landscape. When the New Deal was established and set into motion by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933, it aimed to target national economic recovery and began to inspire hope among the American people. Here, in Georgia O'Keeffe's painting Ram's Head, White Hollyhocks Hills in 1935, Georgia painted a sky that appears to be on the verge of a rainstorm, possibly symbolizing the end of a long drought, and the hollyhock symbolizing abundance and the cycle of rebirth, not only for the environment, but also the nation. So, in conclusion, I've always been drawn to Georgia O'Keeffe's artwork. I believe that she deserves the attention that she has been given, especially in the last few decades. She was a strong female artist that survived through the difficult social times of the 20th century, leaving a legacy for everyone to enjoy. I was fortunate enough to have been able to visit the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico, as well as her home and studio in Abiquiu, New Mexico in March 2023. I photographed this hand sculpture that she had mounted on the wall of her bedroom because I thought it was beautiful. It is a bronze of the Buddhist mudra symbolizing fear not. One of Georgia's best quotes is, "I've been absolutely terrified every second of my life, and I've never let it keep me from doing a single thing I wanted to do." This simple sculpture would remind her to fear not every day. Thanks, everyone. I hope you are inspired to look deeper into Georgia O'Keeffe's art and her life. There's so much more to learn about, as well as some great videos about her life on YouTube. Bye.